3 years into our marriage, Victoria Pembroke suddenly changed. She used to be fresh-faced, content to wear a t-shirt and jeans all summer. But recently, she'd started spending time in front of the mirror, meticulously applying her makeup. New dresses I'd never seen before appeared out of nowhere in her closet chiffon, floral prints, each one making her waist seem even more slender. What bothered me more was the time she spent on her phone. The moment she got home, she'd clutch it in her hand, her fingertips flying across the screen. Sometimes she'd smile at whatever she was looking at, then hastily lock the screen when she heard my footsteps. In that split second before it went dark, I'd always catch a glimpse of the tips of her ears turning red. Why the sudden interest in dressing up, I asked, feigning casualness. Her movements paused. Her reflection in the mirror turned to offer a stiff smile. "Oh, my colleague said I was dressing too frumpy." I didn't press further, but the seed of suspicion in my mind had already sprouted. It all came to a head one evening when she slipped into a sexy light purple dress I'd never seen before, put on light makeup and told me, "College reunion, I'll be back late." The moment the door clicked shut, I grabbed my jacket and went after her. Chapter 1. The instant the hem of Victoria Pembroke's lavender dress swept across the car door as she slipped into the back of a taxi, I started my engine. The low growl of the motor blended into the evening rush-hour traffic. My headlights cast two pale yellow beams on the asphalt, tailing the red taxi's taillights from a safe distance. After a dozen traffic lights, the taxi finally pulled up under the neon sign of the Velvet Lounge. As Victoria pushed the door open, I saw a man waiting for her at the entrance. He immediately stepped forward and gave her a hug. I swung my car into the parking lot across the street. It was only after I killed the engine that I realized my palms were slick with sweat. Walking into the karaoke bar, I was hit by a wall of air freshener mixed with the stench of alcohol. I told the receptionist, "I'm with the lady in the purple dress who just came in." A waiter led me down a hallway. Loud music and Victoria's familiar laughter leaked from the crack of a private room door. I didn't knock. I slammed my palm against the door and shoved it open. The lights in the room flickered on and off. In the instant, a strobe light flashed across Victoria's face. I saw the strange man's hand. His thumb was caressing the base of her fingers. Their eyes were locked together, and Victoria's lips were still curved in a smile, the light in her eyes as soft as melted honey. Blood rushed to my head with a roar. I strode into the room. The chatter and laughter died instantly, leaving only the thumping music. Victoria looked like a startled deer, quickly pulling her hand back. As all heads turned toward me, I drove my foot into the man's side. He let out a yelp and collapsed onto the sofa. I wasn't finished. I grabbed a beer bottle and poured it over his head. The sharp crack of the glass bottle shattering on the floor mingled with Victoria's shriek. "Sincere Clark, are you insane?" I spun around and slapped her across the face. As my hand connected with her cheek, I smelled the perfume in her hair. The light, fresh scent was like a needle, making my temples throb. "I'm insane?" I grabbed her wrist, my knuckles digging into her delicate white skin. "You're sneaking around behind my back and you have the nerve to call me insane? Ethan Hayes just got back from overseas. We were just—" Victoria clutched her face as tears welled up. A man with glasses stood up and walked toward me. "Sincere, customs are different abroad. It was just a handshake between old friends." My memory was good enough. This was Daniel Miller, Victoria's class president from college. He'd even been at our wedding. "Customs?" I spat in his face. "If your wife slept with a foreigner and told you it was just customs, would that be okay with you?" Daniel's face turned the color of a beet, and he reached for my collar. I sidestepped him and drove my fist squarely into his gut. As he crumpled to the floor, groaning, I pulled out my phone, started recording, and panned the camera across their terrified faces. Some quickly turned away, others shielded their faces with their hands. Victoria's sobs were lost in the music like a string playing out of tune. After I finished recording, I looked at Victoria with a cold expression. "Are you coming home with me now, or are you staying here?" Victoria's eyes trembled. Head down, and without a word she got up and followed me. Her choice was clear. Chapter 2. The security door slammed shut behind us, and the key turning in the lock made a grating sound. Victoria still reeked of alcohol from the bar. She was about to say something when I snatched her phone from her purse. "Sincere, just listen to—" She tried to grab it back, her nails leaving faint red scratches on the back of my hand. I threw her hand off. My knuckles trembled as I gripped the phone, the screen reflecting the bloodshot veins in my eyes. Password. She pressed her lips together and shook her head, loose strands of hair sticking to her sweaty cheeks. I suddenly laughed. I grabbed the back of her neck and forced her face toward the screen. The moment it lit up, the Face ID box locked perfectly onto her tear-filled eyes. Click. Unlocked. Give it back, she lunged for it, but I dodged and pushed her back by the chest. Victoria stumbled backward. I opened the search bar and typed the name I'd heard earlier, Ethan Hayes. Several chat windows immediately popped up. There were a lot of messages. It took me a long time to read through them all. Every line was like a needle stabbing at my temples. My thumb swiped faster and faster across the screen, the skin wrinkling from the sweat. Only after confirming that all the records were saved to my cloud drive did I violently hurl the phone onto the sofa. The earliest message was from a month ago. So this Ethan was Victoria's first love from college, who had gone abroad for graduate school. Today was his first day back. That son of a bitch had been constantly flirting with Victoria, making suggestive jokes. And Victoria was no better, constantly complaining about her dissatisfaction with our marriage in response to his advances. She'd gone on and on about how I was uncultured, how my lack of education meant we had nothing in common. Victoria was curled up on the floor, her shoulders trembling like a leaf in the autumn wind. As I dragged her by the hair toward the bed, one of her high heels fell off, hitting the floor with a dull thud. "You want my money but look down on my education?" I pressed my knee into her back, pinning her to the mattress. "I have a high school diploma and a night school degree. I can't compare to your top-tier university education. But if you look down on me so much, you shouldn't have accepted my gifts. You shouldn't have said yes when I proposed." Her cries and pleas for mercy muffled by the pillow. "I was wrong, Sincere. I just had a moment of weakness." Weakness? I yanked her hair, forcing her to look up, my eyes scanning her made-up face. "Did your prestigious university teach you how to be a hypocritical slut who wants to play the whore and still act like a saint?" The last shred of my sanity snapped under her tearful gaze. I could hear my own ragged breathing overpowering her screams. Her clothes tore as I pulled at them, revealing large patches of skin. This didn't quell my anger, it only fanned the flames higher. Chapter 3. As the morning light seeped through the curtains, Victoria moved her fingers, a dull ache radiating from her thighs. She lifted her silk nightgown. The bruises reflected in the mirror were like ink splattered on snow, purplish blue marks dotting her skin below the collarbone. The ones on her waist were particularly dark, imprints from where she'd been pinned against the desk last night. The soreness in her body hadn't faded, but a secret thrill crawled up her spine. She remembered what Sincere had looked like last night. His usually neat hair was disheveled, hanging over his forehead. 2 buttons on his shirt were undone, and his breath was as hot as fire. He was nothing like the man who would prepare breakfast for her in the kitchen. That near-destructive force reminded her of a summer night 3 years ago, when he had pinned her against a tree. She had been wearing a white dress, the hem whipping in the wind, but she had still hooked her arms around his neck. How wonderful it had been when they were dating. He took her racing through tunnels, the roar of the engine drowning out her screams. They waited for meteor showers on a mountaintop, where he'd spread his jacket on the grass for her to rest her head on his lap. In the neon glow of a bar, he had held her chin and fed her half a shot of tequila mouth to mouth. As the liquor trickled down her neck and into her collar, his lips had followed. These were things she, the perpetual good girl, had never dared to imagine. Sincere had crashed into her life like a sugar-coated bomb, blowing up the 20-odd years of her carefully structured existence. She had fallen head over heels. In the process, she'd forgotten all about Ethan Hayes, the always gentle and refined college sweetheart, who would save her a seat in the library. The one who had told her, "Wait for me to come back," before he left to study abroad. What Ethan couldn't get after 3 years of dating, she had given to Sincere in 30 days. In her wedding photo, she was smiling gently, the pearl earrings accentuating her bookish charm. Chapter 4. Sincere's love had been intense, but after marriage, it had slowly settled into something else. He would come home at 2 in the morning, tiptoeing in to tuck her in. He would book an entire restaurant for her birthday, only to get an urgent call from the office as they were cutting the cake. She complained a couple of times, so he started turning down business dinners to watch movies with her. But by the end of the film, he'd be asleep in his chair, the dark circles under his eyes heavier than the closing credits. Later, he learned to just hand her a credit card. Go buy a purse, go buy a necklace. He always said it with an apologetic tone, his fingers swiping through contracts on his tablet, his voice laced with the fatigue of the business world. When her colleagues marveled at her Hermes bag, she had felt a flicker of pride, but over time, it became boring. That was never what she craved. What she missed was the wildness of him pinning her against the car door for a deep kiss, the madness of abandoning the car to run through a thunderstorm. The moments that made her forget she was Victoria Pembroke, university lecturer and daughter of a literature professor. But the sense of propriety her mother had drilled into her since childhood was like an invisible wall, making it impossible for her to even say, "I want to be wild with you in the outdoors again." She wasn't blind to the fact that Sincere was working hard for their family. After they married, her parents started pushing for a grandchild. Sincere had told her he wanted to grow the company a bit more, then train a trustworthy subordinate to handle some of the day-to-day work. That way, he wouldn't be too absent from his child's life when the time came. She could understand Sincere's good intentions, but deep down, she couldn't accept such a placid life. Chapter 5. The day Ethan's message popped up on WhatsApp, she was grading student papers. His question, "Is he good to you?" was like a matchstick, igniting the wasteland hidden beneath her veneer of respectability. She started by replying cautiously, but soon she was pouring out all her dissatisfaction with her marriage. Every word was like walking a tightrope. Every reminiscence of the past, every complaint about Sincere's busy schedule carried the sweet thrill of a forbidden fruit. She had hesitated before agreeing to go to the welcome-back dinner. She sought excitement, but she didn't want to actually cross the line with Ethan. Amidst the thrill-seeking, she retained a sliver of clarity. She couldn't let this destroy her marriage. If Sincere ever found out, it wouldn't just be her reputation at stake, but her parents as well. But when she learned that other classmates would be there, she rationalized it with a clear conscience. It was just a simple college reunion, nothing more. With others around, it couldn't be considered crossing a line. It was just borrowing someone else's party to drown her own sorrows. She spent half an hour picking out an outfit from her closet. She chose the purple dress, because Ethan had once told her she looked best in purple. It wasn't until the door to the room was thrown open, and she saw the bloodshot fury in Sincere's eyes, that she realized she had played with fire and gotten burned. Sincere had lost it just from seeing Ethan holding her hand. She had grossly underestimated his limits. She was terrified. Now, as her fingertips traced the bruise on her waist, Victoria forced a smile at her reflection. He had been so ferocious last night, but he had never said the word divorce. Perhaps things weren't so bad after all. Tonight, she could wear the plaid apron he liked and greet him at the door with a warm glass of mulled wine. He was always susceptible to a soft approach. All she had to do was look at him with red-rimmed eyes, say I was wrong, and bring up some memories from the past few years. He would surely soften. As for Ethan, she would just delete his contact. This brief escape was just a stone tossed into the stagnant waters of her life. Once the ripples subsided, life would have to go on. Just then, her phone rang. It was her father. Chapter 6. The windows of the black sedan were heavily tinted, keeping the early autumn chill at bay. My fingers tapped on the steering wheel, my gaze fixed over the hood on the small ivy-covered villa across the street, the place where Victoria's parents had lived for half their lives. Red paint was splashed across the cream-colored courtyard wall. The words, "House of Whores," were scrawled crookedly, like a bleeding scar. Two young men with green-dyed hair were touching up the letters with paint rollers. The smell of paint mixed with the scent of osmanthus flowers, creating a strangely sweet and cloying aroma. At the base of the wall stood three girls in miniskirts, holding printed screenshots of the chat logs. They were pasting them onto the security door one by one, the rhinestones on their nails glinting harshly in the sunlight. Those were the messages I'd pulled from Victoria's phone, the ones where she told Ethan I was uncultured and that we had nothing in common. Now, they were rustling in the wind for all to see. The rearview mirror reflected the smile on my face. Last year, when I helped Zach Carter set up that club in the South District, he'd slapped his chest and promised, "Anything you need, just say the word." I'd thought it was just talk at the time, but it turned out to be useful. This crew of young punks he sent over were wild. Give them a pack of smokes, and they'd get the job done right. Even if the police were called and they got locked up for a few days, they'd be content with a few $100s upon release. Chapter 7. Victoria's father, Arthur Pembroke, was wearing an immaculately pressed tweed jacket, but at this moment, he looked like a crumpled piece of paper. He hunched over, trying to tear the papers off the door, his fingertips making a sharp scraping sound against the wall. Victoria's mother, Eleanor, brandished a broom, trying to shoo away the crowd of gawking neighbors and passers-by. Her voice was hoarse from shouting. "Nothing to see here. These are all lies," but the people holding up their phones to take pictures only pressed in closer. Someone was live streaming, the camera aimed directly at the red letters on the wall, comments scrolling rapidly across the screen. This elderly couple, who had spent their entire lives basking in the halo of their scholarly family reputation, were now like specimens stripped naked and thrown into a public market. The clicking of phone cameras pinned their humiliation to social media feeds. Suddenly, Arthur straightened up. He fumbled for his phone in his pocket, his knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. His hand trembled as he dialed. The moment the call connected, he practically roared, "Victoria, you get your ass back here right now. Look at the mess you've made." The word refined had long since been washed away by red paint and public scorn. About half an hour later, Victoria's car screeched to a halt at the end of the alley. She was wearing the Chanel suit I'd bought her, but now she was running so hard that one of her shoes had fallen off, and the hem of her skirt was stained with mud. When she saw the words on the wall, she clapped a hand over her mouth, her face turning paler than the white paint. Her mother, Eleanor, lunged at her, tearing at her clothes. "You shameless harlot, you've utterly disgraced us in the chaos." Victoria's phone fell to the ground. The screen was lit up, showing that she was still on a call with me. She picked it up with trembling hands, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "Sincere, you've gone too far. Make them stop." I leaned back in my seat, listening to her furious, tear-choked shouts, my fingers stroking the cool surface of my phone. When she had yelled herself, her breathing ragged like a broken bellows, I finally spoke, my voice as calm as if I were discussing the weather. "Are you done? Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, meet me at City Hall. My lawyer will have the divorce papers ready. You'll sign, agreeing to leave with nothing." There was a few seconds of silence on the other end, followed by a more piercing cry. "Sincere, you can't do this to me. I did nothing with Ethan." "Nothing?" I laughed and pressed the button to lower my window, not bothering to engage in a pointless debate with her. "How about I find some reporters to interview your parents? A literature professor and a high school grade-level head. I wonder what they'd have to say about raising such a shameless woman." Victoria's voice died in her throat, replaced by stifled sobs. I could picture her now, biting her lip, eyes filled with tears, just like every other time she'd messed up. But that trick wouldn't work anymore. "You have 1 day to think about it." I glanced at my watch. 9 a.m. tomorrow, don't be late. With that, I hung up and started the car. In the rearview mirror, the small, ivy-covered house grew smaller and smaller, the red letters glowing like a fire in the twilight. Chapter 8. The next morning, outside City Hall. I leaned against a pillar while my lawyer stood beside me, organizing a file folder. When Victoria appeared, her skirt was still spattered with yesterday's mud. Her makeup was a smeared mess, and her eyes were framed by dark, bruised-looking circles. She saw me and stumbled. The next second, she dropped to her knees on the concrete with a dull thud, a sound that made even the nearby security guard turn his head. "Sincere, I really didn't." She grabbed my pant leg, her nails digging into the fabric. Ethan had just gotten back. We only met that one time. We barely even touched hands. I looked down at her messy hair and let out a cold chuckle. I know. The timeline in the chat logs was perfectly clear. Ethan had landed the afternoon before last, and I had followed Victoria the moment she left the house. Even if she had wanted to do something sordid, there hadn't been time. If another man had actually touched her, I wouldn't have laid a finger on her 2 nights ago. I find that disgusting. Her parents, Arthur and Eleanor, followed behind her, dressed neatly but with faces ashen and defeated. They stood about 10 feet away, their eyes darting between me and Victoria. I couldn't help but remember 3 years ago when I had come to ask for her hand in marriage. They had looked me over like a piece of merchandise, as if the stench of new money on me was tainting their scholarly home. When they learned I only had a high school education and that my parents were deceased, they looked down their noses at me. If Victoria and I hadn't already slept together, those two would have barred the door for good. "Sincere," Eleanor began, her voice raspy, but my glare cut her off. I bent down and pinched Victoria's chin, forcing her to look up. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with her mascara to create black streaks. The people I hired are standing outside your father's office building right now, and I have 2 more waiting outside your mother's high school. Do you want their entire schools to know how their daughter complains about her husband being uncultured and ignorant of romance while flirting with another man? Sincere Arthur lunged forward, his fists clenched and white. I ignored him and pulled out my phone, lighting up the screen. You have 1 minute. If you don't sign, I'll have my people turn your chat logs into a rhyming chant and play it on a loop outside your parents' schools. Victoria's mouth fell open. A tear landed on the paper, smudging the ink. Before she could speak, Arthur grabbed her arm, his voice trembling.
Sign it now." Eleanor rushed forward,
her nails digging into her daughter's arm.
"Stop embarrassing us."
They flanked Victoria, half dragging her toward the entrance. She struggled desperately, still whimpering, "Dad, Mom, I don't want to." Chapter 9. After the divorce was finalized, I sat in my car, feeling an empty sense of melancholy. I came from an ordinary family. My parents were migrant workers who were away most of the year, turning me into what people called a left-behind child. With no one to supervise me, I was exceptionally rebellious from a young age. In middle school, I was the school's notorious troublemaker, skipping class, fighting, dating early. I did it all. My mother had no choice but to quit her job and come back to watch over me, to make sure I went to school. After she returned, I toned it down a bit, but I still had no passion for studying. Relying on a bit of cleverness, my grades hovered around the middle of the class. In the last semester of 9th grade, with my mother at home, the entire financial burden fell on my father. He had an accident during a high-altitude job, falling from a great height. He didn't survive. My father's death brought a compensation payment, and with it the predatory eyes of our relatives. My mother didn't blame me once. She just told me, with red-rimmed eyes, to study hard, her thin frame shielding me from our vulture-like family. Watching her grow thinner by the day, I felt like I grew up overnight. I started studying frantically, and my grades began to climb. But misfortune preys on the unfortunate. In my senior year of high school, my mother passed away from an illness. She was barely in the ground when my grandparents and my uncle's family came knocking, trying to seize our house. They caused a scene every day, making it impossible for me to focus on my studies. I barely made it to the college entrance exams. But on the day of the test, my uncle's family blocked my way, trying to force me to sign over the house. I missed one of the exams and failed to get into any college. With nowhere else to go, I took the leftover compensation money from my father's death and left to make my own way. Perhaps my parents were watching over me from heaven. I met a benefactor in business, and gradually I started making a name for myself. Once my life improved, I remembered how my mother used to talk about me getting into a good university. So I enrolled in an adult education program for a bachelor's degree. It was at that school that I met Victoria Pembroke, who was a student advisor at the time. She had a faint air of melancholy about her, so much like my mother, and I was drawn to her instantly. I worked up the courage to pursue her. Aside from a naive puppy love in middle school, I had no dating experience. My methods were the same old-fashioned tricks I'd heard about in my rebellious youth, but surprisingly they worked. I thought that by marrying her and dedicating myself to her, I could finally have a warm family again, but I never imagined I had misjudged her so completely. I never thought she could be so restless. To compare her to my mother is an insult to my mother's memory. But this isn't over. I won't let anyone who destroyed the family I worked so hard to build get away with it. Chapter 10. About 2 weeks later, Victoria showed up at my company's entrance with Ethan Hayes in tow. Ethan had been having a miserable time. I had found his workplace and home address from his chat logs with Victoria. Every day since, I had people with megaphones stationed outside his office in his apartment, playing his flirtatious messages to Victoria on a loop. At the end, they'd pointedly shout, "Victoria Pembroke is divorced. When are you going to marry her?" Neighbors pointed and whispered. Colleagues gossiped. The story of how he seduced a married woman and caused her divorce had spread like wildfire. He was completely humiliated. The company he had just joined fired him for immoral conduct. Sure, Ethan's family was well off. Anyone who can afford to study abroad isn't poor, so he wouldn't starve without a job. But my thuggish tactics made it impossible for him to face his friends and relatives. When Victoria saw me, her gaze flickered with uncertainty. She hadn't wanted to get involved when Ethan came to her, but she couldn't stand his daily pestering and finally agreed to bring him to see me. Ethan got straight to the point. "What will it take for you to leave me alone?" There was even a hint of grievance in his tone. He had dated Victoria for 3 years, and she had always kept him at arm's length, citing her strict upbringing. He had hoped to make up for lost time now that he was back, only to get kicked by her husband first thing. The incident was shameful, and the injury wasn't serious, so he hadn't dared to call the police. After he found out Victoria was divorced, he was afraid of being tied down to her and had stopped contacting her. In his eyes, a divorced woman was no longer worthy of him. He never expected that I wouldn't let it go. If this continued, his only option was to move his entire family to another city. He was finished here. But moving meant starting over in an unfamiliar place. His parents would never agree, and what about all their relatives? He couldn't just cut ties with everyone. As for calling the police, he had tried. For what those young punks were doing, the most they'd get was a verbal warning at the station. And as for retaliation, after being targeted twice like this, he didn't have the nerve. Chapter 11. I didn't bother beating around the bush either. "The moment you marry Victoria Pembroke, I'll call off my people." His words stunned both Ethan and Victoria. They froze as if petrified. Victoria was the first to react, her voice shrill. "Sincere! What are you talking about?" "I'm your ex-wife, I corrected her coldly. I took out my phone, opened their chat history, and read one of Ethan's old messages aloud. "If you get a divorce, I'll definitely marry you." Then I read one of Victoria's replies. "Even though my husband lacks refinement, he's still good to me." I looked up at Victoria, a cold smirk playing on my lips. "Being with me was such a hardship for you, wasn't it? Since you two are so clearly in love, why shouldn't I do you the favor of bringing you together?" Disbelief was written all over their faces. I put it more bluntly, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "I just want to watch you two, a scumbag and a slut, chained together. I'm curious to see what kind of miserable life you'll make for yourselves." Their faces instantly turned ashen. I didn't give them a chance to respond. "The day you two get married is the day the harassment stops." I turned and walked away, leaving them in what felt like a vacuum of frozen air. Chapter 12. A month later, Ethan and Victoria came to see me again. During that time, to add more pressure, I had hired 2 local live streamers to hang around the schools, where Victoria's parents worked. While streaming, they would casually bring up stories about a certain person's daughter who had an affair, drawing crowds of curious students and teachers. The old couple's lives were thrown into chaos. This time, it was clear they were here to surrender. It was a matter of choosing the lesser of 2 evils. For Ethan, marrying Victoria seemed more tolerable than uprooting his entire family to start over in a strange city. Victoria, on the other hand, had her own calculations. If she were to remarry, she was unlikely to find someone with better prospects than Ethan. After all, while Ethan's family wasn't as wealthy as her ex-husband, they were still comfortably middle class. Besides, the stress of the scandal had sent her parents' blood pressure soaring. They couldn't take much more. Regret had long since started to fester inside her. She shouldn't have sought excitement in an affair, and she certainly shouldn't have met Ethan. The price she was paying was far too high. "We agree to your terms, but you have to promise to stop harassing our families from now on." Ethan spoke first, his voice heavy with suppressed resentment. His own home life had been a nightmare. When his parents found out, the first thing he did upon returning from abroad was to seduce a married woman. They were utterly disappointed in him. I said nothing. Instead, I took out my phone, called the punk who was staked out at Ethan's house, and put it on speaker. "You can pack it up. We're done here." A crisp "got it" came from the other end. I hung up and looked at them. "I want to see your marriage certificate within a week, and I want the wedding to happen within 3 months. Victoria's face went pale. She instinctively started to object. "A wedding is too rushed. Either you do it my way or we continue like this." I cut her off, my voice devoid of any emotion. "The choice is yours." Ethan clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. After a moment of silence, he nodded curtly. "Fine, we agree." He looked at Victoria with a complex expression, a mixture of resentment and resignation. Victoria's lips moved, but she said nothing more, merely lowering her gaze, her long eyelashes hiding the emotion in her eyes. I looked at this pair, each with their own agenda, and felt nothing. They had personally shattered my life. Now they were just getting a taste of the bitter fruit they had sown. And this was only the beginning. Chapter 13. As soon as Victoria and Ethan got their marriage license, I contacted her. I'd had her watched. Since their union was forced, they were full of resentment for each other and naturally avoided any intimacy. When Victoria received my invitation, her voice was full of surprise, but she still agreed to meet. We sat facing each other in a coffee shop. First, I showed her a news article on my phone. A man discovers his wife is having an affair with her personal trainer. He demands a divorce and that she leave with nothing. At the registry office, the wife changes her mind and insists on half the assets. Enraged, the husband sends a video of her infidelity to their family group chat. The wife, overcome with shame, commits suicide. Her parents sue the husband, but the court finds him not guilty, ruling that a family group of only 6 people does not constitute public dissemination. Victoria's face darkened, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. She clearly didn't understand why I was showing her this. I didn't give her much time to think. I swiped to a screenshot from the karaoke bar's security camera. It showed her and Ethan embracing at the entrance, looking intimate. Then I swiped to the next picture. It was a degrading photo of her in the same dress, her body covered in bruises, her clothes disheveled. Fire seemed to erupt from Victoria's eyes. She stared at me, her chest heaving. "Sincere, what the hell do you want? It's simple." I slowly put my phone away, my voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of pressure. "You are not to let Ethan Hayes touch you without my permission." I paused, watching her face turn deathly pale before adding, "Otherwise, these photos will be on your father's phone by tomorrow morning." Victoria bit her lip so hard her knuckles turned white. Finally, she closed her eyes in agony, a film of moisture gathering on her long eyelashes. Chapter 14. The day before Victoria's wedding, I summoned her again. When she saw me, a flicker of panic crossed her eyes, but she forced a calm facade. I gave her no time for pleasantries, pulling her into a hotel room I had already booked. At first, Victoria struggled fiercely, pushing against me with all her might, shouting, "Sincere, you were crazy I'm getting married tomorrow, but the fire of vengeance in my heart burned too hot to care." After a struggle, her strength gave out, and her resistance became feeble. At some point, she not only stopped fighting back but began to cooperate with an unusual fervor. The change puzzled me, but I was in no mood to analyze it. A fierce battle ensued. When it was over, I was breathing heavily. I picked up a small glass vial of colorless liquid from the nightstand and held it out to her. "Tomorrow night, find a chance to slip this into Ethan's drink." Victoria's eyes widened in horror. She stared at the vial, her voice trembling. "What is this? It's not poison, is it?" I would never do something like that, seeing her refusal. My eyes turned cold. I grabbed her jaw, forced her mouth open, and poured the liquid down her throat. Victoria choked and coughed violently, but the liquid still went down. Before long, the drug took effect. Her eyes glazed over, her body grew hot, and she began to press herself against me. And so we fell into a second conquest. Afterward, I leaned against the headboard, lit a cigarette, and said nonchalantly, "It's a powerful aphrodisiac, no side effects." Hearing this, Victoria bit her lip, her face full of reluctance, but in the end she nodded, signaling her agreement. The next evening, Victoria and Ethan returned to their new home. After the guests had left, Victoria followed my plan and mixed the drug into Ethan's water. The effect was swift. Ethan became flushed and feverish, muttering, "Vicky, Vicky." At that moment, I arrived at the door of the wedding suite with Vivian White. Victoria opened the door. When she saw Vivian, whose build and appearance were strikingly similar to her own, her eyes filled with shock. Vivian was someone my friend Zach Carter had found for me. Zach ran bars and clubs in those seedy places. Finding a woman with AIDS wasn't difficult. Vivian walked straight to Ethan, wrapped her arms around him, and skillfully produced a black lace blindfold, tying it over his eyes. Then she kissed him passionately. In his drugged haze, Ethan thought the woman was Victoria. He hugged Vivian tightly and responded with equal fervor. Meanwhile, I took Victoria's hand and led her into the adjoining room. When we were finished, I looked at the marks my grip had left on her skin, leaned in, and whispered in her ear, "Vivian has AIDS. Now that Ethan's been with her, he's been infected." At my words, Victoria's eyes shot open, and all the color drained from her face. The very next morning, she fled back to her parents' house, claiming that Ethan had been too violent with her. To prove her story, She even sent photos of the bruises I had given her to Ethan's parents. Chapter 15. After moving back home, Victoria couldn't stand her parents' constant nagging. She moved into the small apartment she had bought before we were married. This, conveniently, made it easier for us to continue our affair. Meanwhile, a few interesting things were happening on Ethan's end. He knew he had been very drunk on his wedding night, but a sliver of consciousness told him he had definitely slept with Victoria. He couldn't believe he had been so rough with her. Marrying Victoria was humiliating enough, but now she had moved out immediately after the wedding and refused to come back. Just as he was wallowing in his misery, he had a fateful encounter. He met a woman named Vivian White after accidentally hitting her with his car. At first he thought it was an insurance scam, but to his surprise she didn't make any trouble for him at all. They struck up a conversation. A gambling-addicted father, a sick mother, a younger brother in school, the weight of it all was crushing Vivian. Even after being knocked down, she had to rush off to work. Plus, Vivian was attractive. If a man like Ethan didn't help a woman like this, who would? Before long, after a bit of push and pull from Vivian, they ended up in bed together. When he discovered Vivian was a virgin, her hymen surgically restored, Ethan's heart ached for her even more. As their trysts became more frequent, Ethan stopped thinking so much about getting Victoria to come back. But it wasn't long before Victoria told him she was pregnant. She even had his mother accompany her to the prenatal checkup. The results came back, and based on the timing, it was a one-shot conception on their wedding night. Chapter 16. Now Ethan's life was a complete mess. Vivian was showing up at his office every day demanding a commitment, saying she deserved something for being with him. She threatened to cause a scene at his parents' house if he didn't comply. The pressure was suffocating him. To keep her quiet for now, he gritted his teeth and gave her a large sum of money, but his luck didn't hold. Soon, Ethan started feeling constantly fatigued, and strange red rashes appeared on his skin. At first, he thought it was just exhaustion, until one night he spiked a high fever and finally went to the hospital. The day the test results came back, he held the thin sheet of paper, his fingers trembling so much he could barely grip it. HIV positive. The words were like a red-hot brand searing his soul. He stumbled out of the doctor's office feeling like his world had collapsed. His mind was a blank. He hadn't even heard what the doctor said afterward. He couldn't fathom how he could have contracted such a disease. What made it worse was that a few days later, Victoria accidentally found the test results he had hidden at home. She screamed and threw the paper in his face. The Hayes household exploded. Ethan's parents nearly fainted from shock and rage, pointing at him and cursing, smashing porcelain figurines all over the floor. Victoria quickly composed herself and immediately filed for divorce. After some negotiation, she walked away with the majority of Ethan's assets. Her only condition was that she would give birth to the child in her womb. With things having reached this point, I had no further plans for the Hayes family. Even if Ethan suspected I was behind it, he wouldn't have the courage to come after me. After all, Victoria was carrying the only heir to the Hayes family. He wouldn't even dare to demand a paternity test. He couldn't risk it. He couldn't afford to lose that gamble. That's how people are. Give them a sliver of hope, and they'll keep lying to themselves until the day they die. As for Vivian, she took the money and vanished without a trace. She went to Japan, planning to enjoy the rest of her life, while figuring out how to bring glory to her country in her own way. But one can never be too careful. I hired a bodyguard just in case. And for the others who attended that reunion, I put up a 20,000 bounty for each of them. I had Zach send his best-looking male and female models from the club to seduce their spouses and tear their families apart. I paid special attention to Daniel Miller, the class president who had tried to fight me, making sure he got divorced. For the others, I only asked about their status casually when I was paying out the money. This whole charade was finally coming to an end. Chapter 17. Afterward, Victoria started contacting me frequently, calls, texts, a constant stream. I mostly ignored her. One failed marriage had completely eroded any expectations I had for love. Rather than investing effort into a relationship that could sour again, I preferred to have Zach keep an eye out for pretty college students on the verge of financial trouble. I'd give them a monthly allowance, enough for them to live comfortably. In return, I got my physical needs met, and they would carefully provide emotional support. There was no need for genuine feelings, which saved a lot of trouble. If one of them got pregnant, I'd have a paternity test done after the birth, and the child would be mine to raise. I ended up sponsoring 4 college students, enough to make a foursome for Mahjong. On the surface, they all got along, but behind the scenes, they were constantly competing, trying to please me and get ahead. This arrangement gave me plenty of time to focus on my business, and the company grew exponentially. About 8 years later, Ethan's immune system completely collapsed. He was nothing but skin, bones, lying on a hospital bed, barely clinging to life. I timed my visit perfectly, slipping into his room when it was empty. His cloudy eyes saw me, and a flicker of light appeared. A rattling sound came from his throat as if he was trying to speak. I leaned in and said softly, "I forgot to tell you, your precious son, Felix, is actually my flesh and blood." His eyes shot wide open, his chest heaved violently, and he gasped for a breath that never came. His head lolled to the side. He died with his eyes open. A few years after that, Victoria outlived Ethan's parents and inherited the entire Hayes family fortune. The first thing she did was change her son's last name back to Clark. I didn't need to guess her intentions. After her divorce from Ethan, news of her ex-husband's dirty disease had spread. No one in the area would marry her, so she had to raise the child alone. All her hopes for years had been pinned on her son. Changing his name back was simply a move to have him acknowledged by his biological family and latch onto my current wealth. Over the years, my business empire had continued to expand, with my assets now exceeding several billion. I also had 7 or 8 children of my own. I never paid much attention to the one Victoria gave birth to. He was just a byproduct of my revenge. Don't they say a child is the crystallization of love? Between Victoria and me, there was only calculation and hatred. Where was the love? Naturally, I didn't place much importance on this child, but he still carried my blood. On the day of his wedding, I had my assistant send a red envelope with $3 million inside. As for attending in person, there was no need. Some relationships from the very beginning are destined to exist only at a great distance, like 2 parallel lines that never intersect. Victoria probably understood my meaning. She never tried to contact me again.